So, hi everyone, and I want to welcome you to today's broadcast. This is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be back in the theme of CXAfrica and XAfrica as we were talking about in our last broadcast. And I think this is really kind of the corollary to that. And I definitely do want to make a follow up video on African American history, a culture, so that if you are someone who is from an African culture, you can better understand African American culture if you are planning to, immigrate, or if you are visiting for a period of time, and you'll better be able to interact. And I think that's really what's needed. But today we're going to talk about something that I think is really very important and something that we need to major on a lot more. So, I want us to get started. As you guys know, my name is Leela Winston. I am a communications consultant and strategist and analyst, and I, work with companies. I help them with their brand. I do a lot in branding, and also, just to let you guys know, I do have a background in international relations. So I know what I'm talking about, guys. So we're going to have a conversation about international relations, and we're going to have it from a different perspective than I think perhaps you've had in the past, because a lot of times when we do talk about international relations, I don't think we're hitting the points that really make international relations possible. And I want to give you those tools today. If you are an, African person, or you are an African American person, or you belong to a company that wants to do international business, or an agency, a government agency that wants to do international business, I would be happy to support your efforts and what you're hoping to achieve. So let us get on with the presentation. So at the end, definitely you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. I will be available in the comments to answer some of your questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is sort of, open the screen up just a bit more so that you can see my screen. Okay. And so I want to give you an introduction to what it is that we're doing today. So the introduction to this is that we are going to really sit down and have a conversation about what it means to connect in terms of doing business on the continent, and what is really needed that oftentimes isn't talked about as much. So that's what we're going to do today. And I hope that you will go with me in this journey, and we will have the discussion. So I do want to thank you for joining me today. So, we're going to have a few slides that you can follow along if you'd like to take notes. I'm also going to have my contact information at the end if you'd like to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to hear from you. So today we're going to go ahead and, look at some things that I think are really important when we are talking about that. So I think that in terms of trade and doing business, visiting, getting to know people, I think it's really important that we build bridges and not barriers. I think it's important to create bridges between cultures. So a lot of times I think what people do is they run out and they try to do business and create bridges with other cultures, with other countries, and they really haven't considered the cultures that they're going to be working with. And I think it is because of this that sometimes we don't have the level of success. Of course, there are obviously other barriers to that. There are barriers in terms of policy, in terms of, international borders, and things that maybe sometimes make it difficult to conduct trade between countries. These are things that can be worked on, but they need conversations in order to, even begin that process to change that. So I think it's really important to remember that we have to, when we talk about doing business, what we're really talking about is building bridges between cultures, because what's actually going to happen is that you're going to have, these conversations between people, business deals between people. So I think that's important to understand. So we're going to move on to the next slide. And Like I said, definitely share this with someone that you know is doing business in Africa or who wants to do business in Africa, because I think this is a really important aspect of doing it. So this is our course outline for today. So these are the 5 points that we're going to talk about today in our conversation, which is going to give us some groundwork in terms of one, international relations, relating with other nations, and we're specifically talking about the nations on the continent. And then two, of course, public relations, the understanding that you are dealing with the public, no matter who you are and what your level of business may be. The more successful you are at dealing with the public, the more your business will be, depending on the kind of business, will be successful. So it's definitely two areas that you really want to focus on. And of course, the third area is culture. I think that is really the underlying thing that we don't really talk about specifically when we do talk about, Africans doing business on the continent. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the current situation in Africa. And I've made a few notes to really, help us get some context on what is happening in Africa. I believe in research, guys, and really looking into these things. And I think before you jump into any business on the continent, although there's lots of things that are out there, it's really important that you know what's happening on the ground. It's really important that you know the lay of the land and how people think, and also the cultures there and some of their mores. This is going to help you. But just to give you an idea of the situation that is currently going on in Africa, as we consider this, one of the major things that we see on the continent right now is that intra-African trade is extremely small. It is very tiny, to say the least. And the reason it is so tiny is because we have 17% of African imports, or intra-African trade is only 17%. So among African countries, only 17% of the trade and the business, the imports that they are doing is between other African nations. Now, that may seem kind of big, but if you put that in context with other countries, it is an entirely different aspect, and I will give you some numbers. So to give you an idea of where Africa stands in Asia, intra-regional or intra-Asian trade is 59%. That's nearly 60%. So that means the majority of Asian countries are doing business with each other. While they are doing business with the United States, with the European Union, the UK, perhaps with Mexico and some other areas, the majority of their business is actually in Asia. So that is where they are fortified and where they have a level of security, is because they're doing a lot of business among other Asian countries. And to show you what is actually going on in Europe, that number jumps in Europe to 89%. So that is huge. A lot of times we don't realize how much trade that's going on. We know that Europe does a lot of trade with Africa, does a lot of trade with the Middle East and even Asia, but the majority of that trade is being done in Europe. So to give you some idea, Africa is at 17%, Asia is at 59%, and Europe is at 89%. That is incredible. So I think it's important to understand that also 42% of intra-regional manufacturing trade, and that it has only 42, so that's regional trade. So only 42% of the trade that's even in a regional sense is actually, happening at that level. So I think we really have to consider what is exactly happening on the ground. And these stats are coming from a 2019 Brookings study that shows, that kind of intra-African, intra-Asian, and European trade. So this is not something we can say happened 10 years ago or was a trend 20 years ago. This is right now. There's only 17%. And so I want to suggest that there's something more to that, not just policy, not just, maybe some, red tape, or other kinds of things. But there's something else behind the scenes, and I think we need to think about how that little intra-African trade is affecting the way the continent operates and the way African nations operate, to be quite frank. So I want us to be mindful of that. I think it's a really important aspect of what we're doing, but I think we need to remember that there are opportunities out there. The opportunities that we have, really is, the fact that we have so many youth. There are a ton of youth out there. And I think when we talk about the youth, and I think that's a very huge part of, the process, is understanding that we have this large pool of African youth. And then we also have the introduction of the AfCTA, that's the African Continental Trade area. And this is going to be an opportunity for more trade to be conducted. And I think it's something that we really need to take advantage of. And I think we can all take advantage of that, whether you are on the continent or whether you're in the diaspora. I think there's so many opportunities out there. And there's just a wealth of understanding, a wealth of skill. And I think there's just a need for a sort of collective will to do that. But it is important to know that our opportunities are right there with that AfCTA. We have a huge pool of youth, and we also have the diaspora. So I think that's a major, major part of it. So what exactly is going on that makes it so that we're really not seeing that level of trade in Africa? Like I said, there are things that need to change. You can talk about leadership, we can talk about policy, we can talk about, borders, we can talk about a lot of things, and those are quite lofty. And the reason I say they're lofty is because they really talk about some larger issues and instead of kind of moving down toward the micro. Now, when we look at it on a micro level, we can easily say, well, obviously there's some policies in place that make it difficult for trade. We can say there's some policies in place, there's maybe some leadership that needs to be more flexible or maybe change. But ultimately, what we really need to see is we need to see an understanding going on. What we really need is a cultural understanding. And I think that's something that's missing overall. When I was creating my micro class on African culture, I realized something that I had noticed over and over in my interactions with African Americans, Africans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latinos, and many other African descendant groups and continental Africans, is that there was a lack of understanding overall. There is a lack of understanding overall. You have this huge opportunity that's going on, but there is a lack of understanding. So what is the answer? What do we do? Where do we go from here? And I think that's really the question we need to get to, is where do we go from here? My culture is going to be different from your culture. Your culture might be older than my culture. Your culture might be younger than my culture. You may speak one language. I may speak English. You may speak Bemba. You may speak, Yoruba. You may speak Zulu. There's a number of cultures out there, and we have to understand that we have to make departures from what we've been doing in the past. And I think that is where we have to really get into the process. We have all of these opportunities, and so it's really important for us to move toward a process. And unless a process or a framework can be created that can help us to really recognize what we have at stake, I think we're really going to miss the opportunities that are really there. They're just kind of sitting there, but we definitely need to start thinking about a process. And I want to suggest to you that process involves trust building. It involves trust building, and it involves cultural exchange. Because if I do not understand you, I cannot really understand your motives, then the chances of me wanting to do business with you or even doing business with you is going to be very small. And so my goal here today is to say that we need to start building that process. And how do we do that? We have to start with an understanding of the people that we want to do business with. I think this is really critical. I went to the University of Southern California, and that's one of the largest and most diverse universities that you can go to. It does have a high Asian population, but it does have a really interesting mix of people there. And so I can honestly tell you that I had final projects and school projects, and I went to events and other kinds of social gatherings with a plethora of people from the Middle East, people from Asia, people from Africa, people from Western Europe, people from Eastern Europe. So it's really important, to be able to help expand your population. So you need to give them an understanding of other cultures before you can really do business with someone, have some sort of meaningful connection. You have to seek to understand. So the first thing that in the process of trust building and cultural interchange is to seek to understand. So if I eat this kind of food and you eat that kind of food, you can't say my food is nasty or bad, even if you don't like it, even if you don't understand the way I do something, or even if I don't understand the way you do something. So let me just put it this way. There are plenty of cultures around the world, and I've seen many, I've studied some, I've met people from a host of cultures, and I don't love every single culture. There's some cultures that are, some of their practices are not quite my cup of tea, but that doesn't mean that I have to treat them in a particular way because I don't. And it doesn't mean that it has to stop me from doing business or having some kind of interchange that was helpful and useful simply because maybe I don't really, sort of believe in whatever it is that they do. They're not asking me for that. They're trying to buy something from me. They're trying to get something from me, or we want to do some sort of business or get something accomplished. So in order to get something accomplished, the first thing that we want to do is understand. We also need to appreciate culture. I think this is a huge area. I mean, a huge area. Huge. You have to appreciate other people's culture. You don't have to agree with it, but you do have to appreciate it. It doesn't matter if you think, the culture, if it doesn't make sense according to your culture, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter whether you like the way they do things, the food they eat, how they sing their songs, whatever. It is important to appreciate that it's theirs and it's important to them. It's really important to them. It's part of their identity. And the way that you respect people is by respecting their identity. If you told me your name was Joe and I started calling you Bill, that you would not be happy about that, because that means I'm not respecting your identity. And I think this is what we need to understand when it comes to culture, is that you may not necessarily agree with some of their practices or even all of them, but you do have the capacity to appreciate it in the sense that it's theirs and it's a part of their identity. And you need to have that if you're going to meet anybody from any other culture. That appreciation of people's culture is fundamental, and it actually shows in how you treat them regardless of who they are. So if you meet someone who is from, the Philippines, how you greet them is important. How you treat them is important. Or if you meet someone that is from Mali, how you treat them is important. So you have to appreciate other people's cultures. And I think that's a big part of it, is that, building trust means that you're showing that you respect that person, that you respect what they are doing, that you respect their life, and you respect the work that they do. You respect the culture that they're from. It doesn't mean that you practice it as well. Another part of that process too, of course, is outreach. You have to reach out. There has to be a point of reaching out so that you can conduct business. And I think a lot of times people don't reach out because they say, oh, well, that culture is so far from mine. And it's important to understand that when you reach out, you have to come to some kind of understanding about what your third culture will be. This is absolutely important. And a lot of people who have immigrated or, have conducted themselves in environments in which they are a minority understand what it means when it says third culture. The idea is that I may come from culture A and you may come from culture B, but we have to create a happy medium in the middle that respects both of our cultures. And we have to understand that we cannot get all of our cultural mores into that. They can't get all of their cultural mores into that. We have to have a baseline that allows us to be able to conduct ourselves, whether it's business or any other kind of interchange. If you think about two people from an intertribal marriage, let's say, somebody is coming from a Xhosa background, and then you have somebody who is coming from, say, I'm going to say a Fanti background. They're going to have to make a third culture because they can't just use all of his, Xhosa culture, and they can't use all of her Fanti culture. So they have to create this happy medium. And that's really what happens when you talk about doing business with people from cultures that are not like yours, from different countries. And that's what we really need to see when we talk about intra-African trade, is this understanding that we have to create a third culture. And that isn't really available to the small man down there, because he's not thinking of that. And, governments who want to have more forward-facing and international, multinational businesses in Africa really have to focus on getting the rank and file people to understand how to relate interculturally with cultures that are dissimilar from theirs. That's going to be absolutely important. So I think that, when we talk about, sort of the process of reaching out and, of course, building these bridges and cultural interchange, is that we have to set forth a really good PR image. And, public relations isn't just showing people your best side. I think that's great, but it's also having the ability to interact and to represent the best part of either your culture or the best part of your nation, wherever you're from. Let's say you are coming from Togo and you want to, represent yourself in a particular kind of way. I think that your conduct and the way that you interact with people is absolutely important. And as I said in my micro class on African culture, is that it is irresponsible to come to someone's country and not know anything about them, their history, their language, what they're doing, whatever is going on. And this is across the board. We need Africans across the board, whether you are a continental African from Ghana or from Congo or, from Namibia, or whether you are an African American, a Caribbean American, a Latin America, Afro-Latino, you have to educate yourself on the people that you're going to meet, the African people that you're going to meet in whatever locale, because those are the people that are most similar to you. A lot of times I think this PR problem is this lack of understanding or education on the people in that location. I think we've squandered years of opportunities because of that. To Hades with liking someone's culture, let me understand it, to really sit down and understand that culture and then make linkages that create real wealth for parties involved. I think of the people who sort of immigrated to the United States, and since I am an African American, I've lived in the United States. I will use myself as an example, or my group. I cannot imagine the opportunities that African immigrants really could have had if they exploited, and I don't mean exploit in a bad way, but if they really explored their options with the African Americans on the ground. That would have been mind-blowing. A lot has been accomplished by African immigrants, but can you imagine the trade? Can you imagine what would have occurred if that had happened, if they had really said, let's create some linkages. Let's find out how we can do business. Let's find out how we can link up, and just to let you know, there are some, initiatives out there, that, have worked, a lot of African American organizations have worked to sort of keep AGOA going, to keep that trade link between Africa. There's lots of, organizations that African Americans have created to kind of create and facilitate that. But I think that needs to be across the board. It blows my mind that Africa isn't doing business with Jamaica or Barbados or these Caribbean countries. They have a huge, huge population that could come and visit. A lot of these island nations could live in these island nations, do business in these island nations. It would give them greater access to the United States. So would connections with African Americans. So I find it very interesting that if you're not really, thinking about, meeting on a public relations scale, in the sense that you understand that you are representing your people and you're trying to put your best foot forward and you're trying to understand that other culture, I think there are lots of opportunities that can be squandered. And I'm hoping that this won't happen now as we're trying to open up intra-African trade. And now I understand it. I really do. Intra-African trade is small because the same kinds of ideologies are being used or are actually being, considered, that has really kept African trade from growing on the continent. Because if you think about it, the opportunities are endless. I think also it's the sensitization is another thing that's really very important. And I think, we really don't think about it. We don't think about sensitizing people to culture. So here's what I mean by sensitization. It's sort of understanding, given an understanding of a culture. And I have to tell you that the one thing that all Africans have in common, besides this lovely brown melanin, is that they've all been sensitized to Western culture. So there's a certain level of it that we understand and that we recognize, but we have not been sensitized to other African cultures. And that's absolutely essential when you're talking about doing business or conducting any type of, intra-African policy or work. And that has to go beyond leaders. That has to go down to your rank and file people. And until it comes away from just being the leaders and it goes down to being, the guy that's building a business and he's thinking about expanding, and maybe he could expand into the next country. Until it gets down to that guy, we're going to have some true issues, and we really have to change that because there is a lot of opportunity there. And I think that, part of the sensitization is sensitizing Africans to African culture. And you're asking, well, what does that mean? If you're African, then you have African culture, right? Yes and no. So I'll give you an example. You see Western culture on a daily when you turn on the television and most of your media and things of that nature. So you're sensitized to it. Colonialism, a lot of things have really sensitized continental Africans to Western culture. And of course, for Africans outside of that in the diaspora, a lot of them are living in Western enclaves, maybe somewhere in Eastern enclaves like China, the Philippines, Indonesia, but they're sensitized to those cultures. And they know what it means to respect those cultures. But a lot of times, I don't think we know what it means to do that. And so I think in terms of the process of trust building, there needs to be some cultural interchange, because if I just don't understand your culture, it's going to be hard for me to interact with you on a business level. And that's just the plain truth. And if you don't believe this, you need to read some books on international trade. So when I was in college, I read a very interesting, among many other books, but there's one book that I really enjoyed, and it basically talked about how to do business with different regions, from the Middle East to Africa to Asia to Western Europe to indigenous Native American cultures. It talked about how to do business with each culture. And this is really going to be the underlying that's going to help you to be able to successfully cultivate business and trust. So I think one of the things that we overlook when we talk about trying to create African business or intra-African trade is the cultural piece. You have to understand the culture that you're going to meet and try to do business with. You have to understand that culture. You have to appreciate it and respect it. You need to go there with the highest level of respect that you can give it. And this is absolutely critical in the initial phases when you are meeting new groups, when you are hoping to cement, relationships, is that you're giving the highest trust and you're giving the highest respect. Whether you're going to meet someone who is in, let's say, Kenya, and you're trying to understand this Kikuyu community, or whether you're doing business with an African American and you're hoping to understand this African American community and how they interact and how they think. It's important to understand and come with the highest level of respect, because respect helps you to build trust. It's a huge part of it, as well as cultural understanding and interchange. So I think these are really important things. And obviously, we do need to change some things in terms of policy. And I think the only way that we can really do that is to really begin to create some sustainability. And that is our next point, is in the process, when you establish these kinds of, networks or these kinds of relationships, it's important to be able to sustain them. And sustaining them means you have to continually understand that community. You have to understand what is going on there. And I've said this before, and I absolutely mean it, is that you really do have to take some time to get to know cultures and know what it actually means. It's not good enough to just come and show up and say, hey, do you want to do some business with me? Do you want to buy my rice? Do you want to buy my chickens? It's important to understand that. And people have to get to a point of understanding and appreciating cultures. And it isn't appreciating it in the sense that you're going to convert and change your culture to become someone else's. Like, I'm an African American, and I really enjoy learning about African cultures and history. I enjoy African American history and culture, and I really appreciate cultures, but I really appreciate my own. And I'm not so sure I'm going to change that, because I've grown up with it. I've known it my whole life, and I really like it. So I believe, and I know everybody likes their own culture. They really do. They're proud of it. They're happy about it. It's the same way with African Americans. It's the same way with Kenyans. It's the same way with people from Angola. It's the same way for many of people over. So you have to come with that in mind, that people like their culture. They kind of like it. And they're probably not going to change it for you. And if you want to do business with them, the best way to be successful in that is to learn it and then respond in kind, so that you're able to create these relationships. And the sustainability of long-term relationships and connections really comes down to trust and really communicating, because you are from different cultures. So you have to be prepared for there to be misunderstandings. And you can't be quick to say, well, obviously you're disrespecting my culture because you didn't observe this or you didn't observe that, and if you think that, and you really have to believe and understand that everybody has a culture, no matter what, no matter who they are, they do. And the reason I know it is because I can meet someone from another culture. They can look exactly like someone from my family, but the way they respond to certain things tells me instantly that they're not, because they would have understood that if they were a part of my culture. And the same thing goes. So you really have to extend a level of grace to people who are there who do not understand your culture. And the same goes vice versa. People are not going to get it. I'm sorry. People are just not going to get your culture entirely. And you have to be okay with it. And that has to be the way forward in doing business. You can't expect people to. They didn't grow up in it like you. And that could be people who are as close together as Yoruba and Igbo. That could be people who grew up as close together as Xhosa and Zulu. It's just there. You're going to see that. It's really important to understand those differences, even if those differences are small, and you're not going to catch them all. So like I said, you have to extend grace. You have to. And, you have to understand that in order to go to these different places, in order to sustain this, you have to know your own bad press. You got to know your own bad press when you go. What do I mean when I say you have to know your own bad press? What do I mean by that? What that means is you have to know your reputation abroad. Okay? You really do. And these are part of the solutions that we really, I think, have to look at as Africans. The world over, there's been some challenges when it comes to the way that Africans are portrayed. And I understand this, as somebody who's in media, it's a well-known fact. But I want you to know that, I want you to be aware that you have to be aware of your own bad press, whether that press is true or not. It doesn't matter. If you're not aware of it, you have to be understanding of it, particularly because that is going to be the foremost thing in people's minds when they see you. They're not going to see just you. They're going to see you and all of that bad press. You should also know your good press too. And I'm not saying that everybody has all this bad press, but I am saying it's important to know what the good press is and what the bad press is, so that you're there, you know what issues are going to come up. And I think, across the board, we have to talk about, this idea of, presenting good prices to each other, keeping our word, being sure to be honest and upfront. It's really incredibly important when you're doing international trade that you are really kind of being upfront about what it is you're doing, because trust can be lost very quickly. And it can be replaced with different ideas about tribes and, I knew you were this way because you're from here, and I knew you would do this because. So if you don't want that to happen, it's important that you cross your T's and you dot all of your I's, or whatever your language may be. It's important that you are thorough, because the other tribe that you are working with, the other culture, the other country that you're working with, they know your bad press. And you're trying to have and build a relationship that supersedes that. And that's the only way that you're going to continue with business. That's the only way we're going to increase that 17% that is currently the intra-African trade now to something greater. Right now, it's too much. We are looking at, we are really looking at a very small amount of intra-African trade, and that really does need to change. So overall, I think there are solutions. I think we know what those solutions are. I think we know what those solutions are. I think we understand what those solutions are. But I think a lot of times, we are unaware of how we can be a part of it. And the number one thing that we, in terms of business, as Africans, African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, if you're in the diaspora, wherever you may be, but in order to increase that intra-African trade, is that we do have to build trust. It's absolutely important. I think that's the most important thing. Do you want investors? Do whatever it is that you want. The solution today is building trust, because, we really are in a place where lots of other countries, lots of other people are able to do massive business with the continent, but we're really not seeing the same kinds of, partnerships going on, on the continent. And I think that's unfortunate. Why aren't there so many large multinational businesses? I'm trying to figure out right now, why isn't Dangote Cement in the United States? Why can't I even work for Dangote here in the United States, not go to Africa, but right here in the United States? Why is it that maybe someone who, is in banking, can't work for the Tony Elamello Foundation and not be in Africa to do it? It's really important to understand that until we start building those connections, on the continent, it's not going to move beyond that. It has to move beyond that. And I think smart people who want to have multinationals that move beyond that, I think it's going to make a great lot of sense to do business with people in the diaspora, African Americans. The dollar is one of the largest and the highest currency, as well as the pound, the sterling pound right now. So you should be building relationships with those people. That could bring in a lot of revenue for your company. And I do have strategies on how to do that, but you really have to equip your people and yourself if you're going to attempt to do business outside of your country. And it's well worth the effort. Like I said, there are these opportunities coming up. The AfCTA is exciting. It's new. They're constantly working on it now. They're hammering out the details. But we here on the ground, we're going to be the pioneers of the AfCTA. Let's just be clear about that. And in order to be a real pioneer, you have to remove a level of fear, and you have to kind of put yourself out there. And that means putting yourself out there with other cultures, not being easily offended, understanding where people are confused, or, people don't have the information, or, maybe something happened to people, in their past, and with someone from a particular tribe or culture or something like that, and they're bitter about it. But that does not have to be the legacy. That doesn't have to be my legacy. If someone does something to me from a particular tribe or culture, I still need to keep doing business. I still need to keep moving forward. And so I cannot stop there. I have to continue building trust and moving the world forward. Moving the world forward. You move the world forward. We move the world forward. So I want to thank you so much for joining this webinar. And we'll have more in the future. I definitely want to put out more African movie and music reviews. I just watched a couple of really great African movies, and so I want to tell you guys about those. I think you'll rather enjoy them. And if you are someone who is in movie or music, definitely I think you should contact me. But more importantly, right now for this conversation, I do want to say that if you are, let's say a business, or you are a government agency, I do want to give you an opportunity to reach out to me. Like I said, I am a consultant. I have a very great background in understanding African cultures across the board. So I'm not just talking about West Africa. I'm not just talking about, Bantu people. And I also have the background of international relations and public relations. So a lot of times what we're missing, that key component, is the relation part, that understanding culture, understanding international relations. And I'm just going to say it right now. I think it's vitally important to definitely take down my contact information, but I think it's really, vitally important that, we do start understanding the cultures and making those linkages. How else are we going to have this really amazing opportunity to do business? We really need to start doing that. And we really need to start patronizing people who have that vision too. I'm one of those people who definitely has that vision. And I want you to contact me so that I can help you with your business or your government agency to help connect you with the resources you need, a plan that you need to get your people ready for doing business internationally. And I'm going to say this, and I really do mean it. If you are an African country, you need an African American person on your board somewhere. Why do you need that? Why do you need that? Because that African American person is going to tell you information about African Americans that's going to give you a window in. And I'm going to tell you something else. If you're going to do business with Kenya, if you're going to do business with Congo, if you're going to do business with South Africa, you need a South African on your board, or in your board of advisory. You need a Kenyan there. You need someone who's there who understands that lay of the land and who can give you advice that's meaningful and that makes sense in that context. If you're going to do business with a particular tribe, let's take it down to the tribe level. If you're going to do business with a particular type of tribe, you need someone from that tribe on your board so that you can really understand how to connect. I mean, I think we have to really get to this point where we start this level of, bringing people in. It is better to understand and make strides than to just really house ourselves in silos that really never gets anything done. And that's really the sad part, is that, as long as we have been having immigration to the United States, I think since the 60s, or, the early 60s, we've started to see more immigration and that kind of thing. And that's fantastic and lovely. But we're not seeing that level of business going on between, African Americans and Africans that come here. That's like a huge missed opportunity. You could have a business that have been going on, an international, multinational corporation that could have been existing for at least 40 years. That's not even 40 years, like more than that. That's such an opportunity missed, such an opportunity. And how many people have moved to South Africa? How many Africans have moved to South Africa for greener pastures? Has any multinationals come out of that? That's an issue. That's a huge issue. If you really haven't had those kinds of, things blossoming out of that. And I can honestly tell you that lots of other groups have really sort of, leaned on their diaspora and their connections in different locations in order to get things done. So I think it's a mistake to overlook the Black Britons. It's a mistake to overlook the Afro-Latinos. It's a mistake to overlook, the people who are right next door to you. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I'm going to give you my contact information again. I do want to encourage you to visit my website, and I want to encourage you to send me an email. Even if you're not even sure what you need me to do, send me an email. Tell me what you thought about this webinar. Tell me what you would like to see. If you would like to see other kinds of content that kind of helps businesses to sort of build, relationships. And that's really the idea of CXAfrica. There's XAfrica, which means Experience Africa, and then there's CXAfrica. This is the idea that Africa can create an experience for those who come to the continent, one that is really representative of those cultures that are in your locale, and is really representative of the Africa of the future. I think that's really it. I think there is a time for Africa of the future, and I think it is now. So I want to thank you so much for tuning into this webinar. Definitely, I want to encourage you right now, go ahead and send me an email. You can also leave me a message here at YouTube. This video is also going to be made available in other spaces, but I want to encourage you to also share this with someone who's doing business in Africa, even if they are doing it African country to African country, because that's really what this is about, is intra-African trade. But even if they're doing business with just people that are across the street, maybe they're of a different tribe than they are, they need to see this and understand how to really move themselves through the process of doing business beyond just the numbers, that business is undergirded by something more than just money. It's undergirded by more. And you can see that in the figures where I told you that in Asia, you have an intra-Asian trade rate of 59%. In Europe, it's 89%. Wow. In Africa, it's 17%. No, we can do better than that. And I want to help us do better than that. And as someone who is a specialist, I do want you to contact me right now. And I would be happy to talk to you. If you have any suggestions about content that you would like to see in terms of my expertise, I would be happy to share that with you. As you guys know, I'm going to share about 5 CX webinars here online for you to check out. And then, of course, if you need me to do a presentation specifically for your company or business, we can do that today, and how they can start galvanizing culture to create real connections for business. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Leila Winston, and I hope you have a great day. Bye, guys.